I'm not going to give you guys a long talk, inshallah ta'ala. It's something very short, something I think is relevant to you at this age, and something I feel you better address now, and nobody but yourself can really address it for you. The ayah that I want to base this talk on basically are two ayat. One comes from the beginning of Surah Al-Imran. This is the third surah of the Qur'an, and one of the longest. One's in the beginning of Al-Imran, and the other is at the end of Al-Imran. But they both deal with the same concept. In the beginning, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ يَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِهِ كُلٌّ مِنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ إِلَّا أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. This is in the beginning. I'll share the meaning with you in a bit, inshallah. At the end of this same surah, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. So he mentions the same group, Ulul Albab. That's the term used in the beginning of the surah and also at the end. You know how in a class, if a good teacher is teaching a class, they'll start with a lesson, they'll get into lots of stuff, and by the end of class, right before they let you go, if they know what they're doing, you know what they're going to do? They're going to review everything they talked about in the beginning. They won't leave you without doing sort of a recap of everything we talked about. Remember A, B, C, D, this is what we did today, right? That's the idea. The same thing happens in the Qur'an a lot. So Allah will talk about a bunch of things in the surah, but by the end, He'll wrap it all up by bringing up exactly the very things He started with. Okay, this is what's happening in this surah also. Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions a group called Ar-Rasikhuna fil Ilm, those who are deeply rooted in knowledge. And before I go on, I want to share one more thing with you guys, which is that when you're learning, when you're listening to a talk or a speech or a lecture or anything like that, doors open, people walk by, kids cry, people scratch their heads, all kinds of things happen that would never get your attention. You would never look at those things ever, unless you're sitting in a lecture. Then all of a sudden the door opening becomes the most interesting. Watch. 20 heads. Oh my God, it opens all the way. And you're going to walk all the way across the room and all the heads go that way, and go that way, right? So when you're learning, when it comes to learning, it takes very little to distract you. So much as a squirrel going up a tree. If you're sitting in college in your classroom and a squirrel goes up a tree out the window, 400 people like that, right? Even if they're PhDs. So try to avoid the temptation, and inshallah ta'ala, you'll become better learners that way. So what was I talking about before the door opened? Gotcha, good. Yeah, Ulul Albab, the people that are deeply rooted in knowledge. Allah talks about intellectuals basically. Who is an intellectual according to Allah? Now, in our times, who do you consider an intellectual? Somebody who's really smart, somebody who uses big words, a professor, a Rhodes Scholar, a PhD, a doctor, a scientist. These are intellectuals, right? So Allah gives His own definition of what's an intellectual. He says, آمَنَّا بِهِ كُلُّ مِنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا. Those who are deeply rooted in knowledge, they say we come to believe in it being the Qur'an. That's the first sign of a true intellectual. The second, كُلُّ مِنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا. All of it is especially from our Master. In other words, whether we get it or not, it's from Allah. The parts we understand of the Qur'an are from Allah, and the parts we don't understand are from Allah. We give our intellect up. We understand the limits of our intellect. Right? So the true intellectual is the one, the truly smart, the truly scholarly is the one who knows the limits of their intellect. That's the first thing. And then Allah says, وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ التَّذَكُّرُ, which is actually a form of يَتَذَكَّرُ. This word in Arabic means to make an effort to remember. So Allah says, who's going to make an effort to remember at all except, and then He mentions this group called Ulul Albab. And to be very coarse and rough in translation, I'll say the people that possess the essence, the people of pure essence. So who are these people of pure essence and how do you become one? Right? That's the question. Allah says nobody makes an effort to remember truth and remember this lesson about who's an intellectual, who really is rooted in knowledge, except the people of pure essence. So when you go to the end of the surah, you'll find a definition of who these Ulul Albab are. In the beginning it says, you want to be deeply grounded in knowledge, you want to have these characteristics, become a person of pure essence. At the end, how do you become a person of pure essence? How do you become a person, if you want to use simple terminology, a clean mind, a pure mind? Okay? Because what we're learning here is you cannot become a person of deep thought until you become a person of a pure mind. That's the thing I want to talk to you about in the next 10 or so minutes. What does it mean to have a pure mind? And what does Allah define it as? The word lub, which is the root, the source word in Albab, is the word lub. Lub in Arabic means, aqlun salih. It means a good mind, khalisun min ash-shawa'ib, that's the key word. It's free from vanities. A sound mind that is free from vanities. And this is, if you don't remember anything from this talk, this is what I'd like you to remember. A sound mind is one that is free from, what was that word again? Vanity. Vanity. Useless thought. Useless knowledge. And we're living in a society, and in times, it's not even just in the United States, it's all over the world, where there's what you can call information overload. We're all Googled out. Okay, we have too much information. And information is being bombarded to us, left, right, and center, wherever you go. Messages are being pumped at you in advertising, when you turn the radio on, when you're flipping channels, when you're going through websites, banner ads, this, that, the other. Sports statistics, characters in movies, how many seasons of what show, and what happened to that guy, and what they are, from video games to movies to news to everything else. There's tons and tons and tons of information is being bombarded at you, right? And you can't even so much as drink a bottle of Snapple. You take the cap off, and what do you get? A useless fact on the back, right? Constantly you're being exposed to information, and you get exposed to so much information that you can't tell the difference between useful and useless information anymore. You become desensitized. You have so much information that you can't tell what's useful and what's useless, because it's all just a big mess in your head. But the other thing that happens is, when you really come across some really knowledgeable, beneficial information, something that's really going to help you in life, you don't appreciate it. You put it on the shelf along with all the other junk in your head. You don't really see what the point of it is. I'll give you an example of that. Do you know what's been said about Surah Yusuf in the Qur'an? How Allah introduces it? How does Allah praise the story of Yusuf? What does He call it? It's a famous thing. We're telling you what? We're narrating on to you, even if you know the rough translation. The best narrative. This is the best story. Allah calls the story of Yusuf alayhi salam the best story. You can chit chat later. Can you turn it off? Okay, fine, don't close the door. I'll stop talking. Fine. How do you make them feel bad? They don't even feel bad. Anyway, the worst is when you're giving a lecture and the guy in the front row has sent a phone call, which of course he has to have a 50-cent phone ring for some reason. First he lets it go for half the song, and then, when everybody's head is going like this, then he picks it up and says, yeah, I can't talk right now, I'm in a lecture. Oh, what happened? Oh, really? And then they go for a whole conversation with him. So, be considerate to your audience. Anyway, so be considerate to a speaker. It takes a lot to speak, and if you guys get distracted easily, imagine the speaker. Right? They see a distraction, like, where am I? What am I doing? Okay. So what was I saying again? Aha, useless and useful information. Very good. Okay. So the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, Allah says it's the best possible story. I was teaching it at Sunday school one time, and you know what happened? One of the kids goes, no, it's not. I'm like, why? I'm not going to say, that's kufr, astaghfirullah, check your aqidah. He's in 3rd grade. He said, no, it's not. I said, why isn't it? He goes, Dragon Ball Z is so much better. And he's telling me the whole history, how he went from Saiyan to Super Saiyan, and his hair went from blonde to yellow to green to whatever, right? And he came back to life in the dragon, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty cool, man. That is pretty interesting. But Allah says what? That the story of Yusuf is the best story. But it might be hard to convince a child of that. They might be more impressed with their video game, the story, the plot in their video game, or the story they're watching in a cartoon show, right? Or a movie they saw. They thought that was an awesome storyline. So many twists and turns. So how do you explain that to a child, or how do you convince them even? You don't have to actually. Allah at the end of that, so remember how I said the lessons in the beginning and then the answer or reviews at the end? What happens at the end of Surah Yusuf? Allah says, لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قِصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ. In their stories there are lessons, profound lessons, but for who? Not for everyone. لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. For the people of what? What is Ulul Albab? Your minds that are free from what?